Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished another set of push-ups in her small apartment. The 24-year-old had been preparing for months, knowing that joining the military would be the biggest challenge of her life. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in Detroit, she learned early that being small didn't mean being weak. Her father had abandoned the family when she was 8, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Standing at just 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing barely 125 pounds, Sarah didn't look like someone who could handle military training. Her neighbors often questioned her decision to enlist, especially the older men who gathered at the corner store. They would shake their heads and mutter about how the military wasn't a place for girls like her. But Sarah had made up her mind. She needed the structure, the purpose, and most importantly, the chance to prove herself. The decision came after her younger brother Miguel got arrested for dealing drugs. As she sat in the police station waiting for their mother, Sarah realized she needed to set a different example. She wanted to show Miguel and her little sister Rosa that there were other paths in life. The military recruiter had painted a picture of discipline, honor, and opportunity that appealed to her sense of justice. Sarah's preparation routine was intense. Every morning at 5, she would run 6 miles through the empty streets. Her route took her past abandoned buildings and through parks where she had played as a child. The familiar sights reminded her why she was doing this. After her run, she would spend an hour doing body weight exercises in her room, focusing on building functional strength rather than bulk. Her mother, Carmen, worried constantly about her daughter's plans. Carmen worked 2 jobs as a house cleaner and had seen too many young people from their neighborhood disappear into systems that chewed them up and spit them out. She feared the military would be no different. But she also recognized the determination in Sarah's eyes, the same fire that had gotten her through high school when most of her friends dropped out. The local gym became Sarah's second home. The owner, Frank, was a former Marine who had taken an interest in her training. He taught her proper fighting techniques and helped her understand that combat wasn't just about strength. It was about strategy, timing, and using an opponent's size against them. Frank had seen plenty of tough guys come through his gym, but there was something different about Sarah's focus and dedication. As her departure date approached, Sarah's confidence grew. She had studied military manuals, practiced combat drills, and pushed her body to limits she never thought possible. Her friends threw her a going-away party at the community center, and even some of the skeptical neighbors showed up to wish her well. Deep down, many of them admired her courage even if they couldn't understand her choice. The night before leaving for basic training, Sarah sat on her fire escape looking out over the city lights. The sounds of sirens and traffic filled the air, but she felt a strange peace. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter, one that would test everything she thought she knew about herself. She thought about the challenges ahead and the people who doubted her abilities. Her phone buzzed with a text from Miguel, who was now in a youth detention center. He had written simply, "Make us proud, sis." Those 4 words meant more to her than all the encouragement from recruiters and training sergeants. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about proving that kids from their neighborhood could rise above their circumstances. Sarah's journey was about to begin, and she had no idea that her path would eventually lead to a confrontation that would change everything she thought she knew about strength, respect, and what it truly meant to be a warrior. The small girl from Detroit was ready to face whatever came next, armed with determination and a fire that burned brighter than anyone around her could imagine. The bus ride to Fort Benning felt like the longest journey of Sarah's life. As the familiar skyline of Detroit disappeared behind her, she clutched her small duffel bag and tried to calm her racing heart. Around her, other recruits chatted nervously or stared out windows with the same mixture of excitement and terror she felt. Most of them were bigger than her, and many were men who looked like they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. When the bus finally stopped, the doors opened to reveal a world of shouting drill sergeants and organized chaos. Sarah's feet barely touched the ground before a massive sergeant was in her face, screaming instructions she could barely understand. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork, medical checks, and equipment distribution. Everything felt too big for her small frame, from the boots to the uniform that hung loose on her tiny shoulders. Her bunk was in a bay with 30 other female recruits, and it didn't take long for the whispers to start. Some of the women looked at her with sympathy, as if she were a lost child who had wandered into the wrong place. Others seemed annoyed that someone so obviously unprepared had been allowed to join their ranks. Sarah kept her head down and focused on following orders, but she could feel their eyes on her constantly. The first week nearly broke her. The physical training that had seemed manageable in her Detroit neighborhood became a daily nightmare of failed attempts and public humiliation. While other recruits struggled with push-ups, Sarah couldn't even complete the minimum requirements. During the obstacle course, she fell repeatedly from walls that seemed impossibly high. Her drill sergeants showed no mercy, singling her out as an example of what weakness looked like. Drill Sergeant Martinez, ironically sharing her last name, seemed to take personal offense at her presence. He would make her repeat exercises while the rest of the platoon watched, his voice echoing across the training ground as he questioned why the military was wasting time on someone who clearly didn't belong. The other recruits learned to be grateful when his attention was focused on her instead of them. The worst moment came during the second week when Sarah collapsed during a long march carrying full gear. The weight of her pack combined with the relentless pace had finally overwhelmed her small frame. As she lay gasping in the Georgia dust, she heard some recruits muttering that she should just quit and go home. Even her bunkmates avoided eye contact when she returned to the barracks that evening, as if failure might be contagious. But something strange happened as the weeks progressed. The same determination that had gotten Sarah through her childhood neighborhood began to resurface. She started waking up an hour before reveille to practice exercises in the bathroom. During free time, she studied field manuals while others wrote letters home. She began to understand that she couldn't compete with her fellow recruits in terms of raw strength, but she could outwork them in preparation and technique. Frank's lessons from the Detroit gym started making sense in ways they never had before. When larger recruits relied on brute force during hand-to-hand combat training, Sarah used leverage and timing. She learned to turn her small size into an advantage, slipping out of holds that would trap bigger opponents and finding angles of attack that her instructors hadn't expected from someone her size. The turning point came during a night navigation exercise. While other recruits struggled to read maps and use compasses in the darkness, Sarah's years of walking through Detroit's dangerous streets had given her an almost supernatural sense of direction. She not only completed the course first, but helped two lost teammates find their way back to the rally point. Slowly, the attitude of her fellow recruits began to change. They started asking for her help with map reading and navigation techniques. Her bunkmates noticed that she never complained, never made excuses, and never gave up no matter how many times she failed at a task. They began to see past her small stature to the iron will that drove her forward every single day. By the end of basic training, Sarah had earned something more valuable than the respect of her peers. She had proven to herself that size and strength weren't the only measures of a soldier. Her graduation photo showed a transformed young woman, still small in stature but radiating a confidence that came from surviving her own personal hell and emerging stronger on the other side. As she prepared for advanced training, Sarah had no idea that her reputation was already beginning to spread. Word of the tiny recruit who refused to quit had reached instructors at other bases, and some were curious to see what this unlikely soldier could accomplish when faced with even greater challenges. Sarah's orders for advanced infantry training came with a surprise assignment to Fort Bragg, home of the Army's Special Operations Command. The base buzzed with an energy different from basic training, filled with elite soldiers who moved with a confidence that came from years of specialized training. As Sarah walked through the main gate carrying her gear, she couldn't help but feel like she had stepped into a different world entirely. Her new training company was smaller and more intense than anything she had experienced. The instructors were seasoned veterans with combat experience, and they made it clear from day one that not everyone would successfully complete the program. Sarah found herself surrounded by soldiers who had volunteered for the most challenging assignments the Army could offer. And once again, she was by far the smallest person in the group. The training schedule was brutal. Days started before dawn with conditioning runs that covered miles of rough terrain. Sarah's body, now hardened by months of military training, handled the physical demands better than she had expected. Her technique continued to improve, and she discovered an unexpected talent for marksmanship that surprised even her instructors. Her small hands and steady nerves made her naturally accurate with various weapon systems. It was during the third week of training that Sarah first encountered members of the Special Operations community. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and other elite units regularly used Fort Bragg for training exercises, and their presence added another layer of intensity to the already challenging environment. These were the soldiers that other soldiers looked up to, men who had earned their reputations through some of the most difficult military training in the world. Among them was Commander James "Tank" Harrison, a Navy SEAL with 15 years of experience and a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. Standing 6 feet 3 inches tall with the build of a professional athlete, Tank commanded respect through his presence alone. He had led countless missions in hostile territory and trained hundreds of naval special warfare candidates. His opinion carried weight throughout the special operations community. Tank first noticed Sarah during a joint training exercise involving urban combat scenarios. While observing from the sidelines, he watched as the small soldier maneuvered through a mock building with a precision that caught his attention. Her movements were economical and purposeful, showing a tactical awareness that usually took years to develop. When the exercise concluded, he asked one of the Army instructors about the tiny soldier who had impressed him. The instructor's response was mixed. Sarah's technical skills and determination were beyond question, but there were ongoing concerns about her physical limitations. In a community where lives often depended on the ability to carry wounded teammates or overpower larger opponents, her size remained a significant factor. Tank listened to these concerns with interest, filing away his observations for future reference. Sarah remained unaware of the attention she was attracting from the special operations community. She was too focused on her own training to notice the conversations happening around her. Each day brought new challenges that pushed her abilities to their limits. Combat diving, advanced weapons training, and complex tactical scenarios filled her schedule from morning until night. Her fellow trainees had learned to appreciate her unique skills. During planning sessions for training exercises, they often turned to Sarah for her insights on navigation and tactical approaches. Her ability to think creatively about problems had proven valuable in scenarios where conventional solutions failed. She had earned their respect through consistent performance rather than physical dominance. The first direct interaction between Sarah and Tank occurred during a base-wide combat tournament designed to foster competition between different units. Sarah had been selected to represent her training company in the hand-to-hand combat division, despite being significantly smaller than most other competitors. The tournament was held in the base gymnasium with several hundred spectators, including many special operations personnel. Tank watched from the stands as Sarah faced her first opponent, a Ranger candidate who outweighed her by nearly 60 pounds. The match began with the larger soldier attempting to use his size advantage to overwhelm her quickly. But Sarah had learned well from Frank's teachings back in Detroit, using her opponent's aggression against him and scoring points through technical skill rather than brute force. As the tournament progressed, Sarah continued to advance through the brackets by outthinking rather than overpowering her opponents. Tank found himself genuinely impressed by her performance, though he maintained the skepticism that came from years of experience in environments where physical capability could mean the difference between life and death. The tournament would prove to be a turning point in Sarah's military career. Though she had no way of knowing it at the time, word of her performance spread quickly through the tight-knit special operations community, creating a buzz of interest and debate about the small soldier who was challenging conventional assumptions about what made an effective warrior. The Fort Bragg Officers Club was filled with the usual Friday evening crowd of seasoned soldiers, unwinding after another demanding week of training. Tank Harrison sat at a corner table with several other special operations commanders, their conversation flowing between war stories and assessments of current training programs. The atmosphere was relaxed, but the underlying current of military professionalism never completely disappeared from these gatherings. Major Lisa Chen, an Army Special Forces officer, brought up the recent combat tournament and specifically mentioned Sarah's unexpected performance. She had been impressed by the young soldier's tactical thinking and wondered aloud whether the special operations community might be overlooking potential candidates based on outdated physical criteria. Her comments sparked a debate that would have consequences none of them anticipated. Tank listened to the discussion with growing skepticism. While he acknowledged Sarah's technical skills, he remained convinced that the physical demands of special operations required a level of strength and endurance that simply couldn't be compensated for through technique alone. He had seen too many situations where brute force was the only solution, where lives depended on the ability to physically dominate opponents or carry equipment over impossible terrain. As the evening progressed and drinks flowed more freely, the conversation became more animated. Tank found himself defending traditional selection criteria against officers who argued for a more inclusive approach to special operations recruitment. The debate touched on fundamental questions about the nature of warfare and whether changing technologies might require different types of soldiers than had been needed in previous generations. Major Chen, who had become something of an advocate for Sarah without the young soldier's knowledge, suggested that Tank's confidence in traditional methods might be less justified than he believed. She pointed out that Sarah had consistently outperformed larger, stronger soldiers in complex scenarios that required adaptability and creative thinking. Her words carried an implied challenge that Tank couldn't ignore. The conversation reached a turning point when Tank declared that technical skill could only take someone so far in real combat situations. He expressed doubt that Sarah or anyone her size could handle the physical realities of special operations missions, regardless of their training or mental toughness. His comments reflected genuinely held beliefs about military effectiveness, but they were delivered with a certainty that rubbed some of his colleagues the wrong way. Major Chen's response was direct and pointed. She suggested that Tank's assessment might be influenced more by assumptions than by actual evidence. She proposed that if he was so confident in his position, perhaps he would be willing to test his theories against Sarah's abilities in a controlled setting. The challenge hung in the air for several moments before Tank accepted, his pride and professional reputation now invested in the outcome. Word of the impending demonstration spread quickly through the Fort Bragg community. What had started as a theoretical discussion between officers had evolved into something much more significant. Tank found himself committed to a public test of his beliefs about physical requirements for elite soldiers, while Sarah remained unaware that her future was being debated in venues far above her current pay grade. The terms of the demonstration were established over the following week. It would take place during a base-wide training event that was already scheduled, ensuring maximum visibility within the military community. Tank would face Sarah in a controlled combat scenario designed to test various aspects of military skill, from hand-to-hand combat to tactical problem-solving under pressure. Tank's preparation was methodical and professional. He reviewed Sarah's training records and performance evaluations, studying her techniques and looking for weaknesses he could exploit. His approach was clinical rather than personal, viewing the upcoming encounter as an opportunity to validate important principles about military effectiveness rather than a contest between individuals. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her regular training routine, still unaware of the attention she had attracted or the demonstration that was being planned around her abilities. Her instructors noticed an increase in interest from senior officers, but they attributed it to her continued improvement rather than any specific upcoming event. The announcement of the demonstration came during a routine formation, delivered as part of a broader training schedule. Sarah's name was called along with Tank's, identifying them as participants in what was described as a leadership and tactics exercise. The casual presentation masked the significance of what was actually being planned, but Sarah recognized the name of the famous SEAL commander and felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the opportunity. As word spread through the base, opinions began to form about the likely outcome. Many soldiers respected Sarah's achievements but doubted she could match Tank's experience and physical advantages. Others saw the demonstration as an opportunity for the special operations community to learn something new about the relationship between physical capability and military effectiveness. Tank maintained his professional demeanor throughout the preparation period, but privately he was confident about the outcome. His years of experience and proven track record spoke for themselves, and he viewed the demonstration as a chance to settle questions about military standards that had been troubling him for some time. He had no intention of embarrassing Sarah personally, but he was determined to prove his point about the realities of special operations warfare. The week leading up to the demonstration transformed Fort Bragg into a hive of anticipation and speculation. News of the upcoming encounter between Sarah and Tank had spread far beyond the officers' club where it originated, reaching every corner of the base and even generating interest at other military installations. What had begun as a theoretical discussion about military standards had evolved into something approaching a sporting event. Sarah found herself at the center of attention in ways that made her deeply uncomfortable. Soldiers who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to offer advice or share their opinions about her chances against the legendary SEAL commander. The constant scrutiny reminded her of her early days in basic training. Except now the stakes felt infinitely higher, and the audience much more sophisticated. Her training intensified during this period, though not by official design. Sarah's instructors maintained their regular curriculum, but she found herself staying after hours to work on techniques that might prove useful in the demonstration. The base gymnasium became her second home as she practiced scenarios and refined movements that had become second nature through months of repetition. Tank's preparation was characteristically methodical. He studied video footage of Sarah's previous training exercises, analyzing her fighting style and identifying patterns in her tactical decision-making. His approach was that of a professional athlete preparing for competition, leaving nothing to chance while maintaining the confidence that came from years of successful operations in hostile environments. The special operations community watched these preparations with intense interest. Many had worked with Tank for years and had never seen him invest this level of preparation in what was essentially a training exercise. His thoroughness suggested that he viewed the demonstration as more significant than a simple validation of his opinions about military standards. Major Chen, who had inadvertently sparked the entire situation, found herself questioning whether she had done Sarah any favors by advocating for her capabilities. The young soldier was about to face one of the most respected warriors in the military, under circumstances that could define her entire career. Chen began to worry that her good intentions might have created an impossible situation for someone she genuinely wanted to see succeed. Sarah's fellow trainees were divided in their support. Some genuinely believed she had the skills to surprise Tank and prove that size wasn't everything in combat situations. Others worried that the demonstration would end her military career before it had truly begun, marking her as someone who had reached beyond her capabilities and failed spectacularly in front of the entire base. The betting pools that emerged throughout Fort Bragg reflected these mixed opinions. While most money favored Tank due to his reputation and obvious physical advantages, there was surprising support for Sarah among soldiers who had witnessed her training performances firsthand. The odds makers struggled to establish fair lines for such an unusual matchup. Tank maintained his public confidence throughout this period, but privately he found himself thinking more deeply about the demonstration than he had initially expected. His conversations with other special operations veterans revealed a range of opinions about the outcome that surprised him. Several respected colleagues suggested that his assumptions about physical requirements might be challenged in ways he hadn't anticipated. The base commander, General Patricia Rodriguez, watched the growing excitement with mixed feelings. While she appreciated the enthusiasm for training and competition, she was concerned about the potential consequences for both participants. The demonstration had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of broader debates about military evolution and standards that extended far beyond the original discussion. Sarah's preparation took on an almost spiritual quality during the final days before the demonstration. She found herself thinking about her family back in Detroit, about Miguel still serving his time in detention, and about her sister Rosa, who was now talking about following her into military service. The weight of representation pressed down on her as she realized she was carrying more than just her own reputation into the upcoming encounter. The physical preparations were only part of the challenge she faced. Sarah spent hours studying Tank's background and military record, trying to understand his tactical preferences and fighting style. She knew that raw technical skill wouldn't be enough against someone with his experience, and she began to develop strategies that might allow her to compete, despite her obvious disadvantages. Frank, her old trainer from Detroit, had taught her that every opponent had weaknesses, regardless of their apparent strengths. The challenge was identifying those weaknesses and creating situations where they became significant factors in the outcome. Sarah began to see the demonstration not as a test of strength against strength, but as an opportunity to prove that intelligence and adaptability could overcome conventional advantages. The base's training staff worked to ensure that the demonstration would be conducted fairly and safely, establishing rules and oversight procedures that would protect both participants while allowing for a meaningful test of their respective capabilities. Medical personnel were briefed and positioned to respond immediately to any serious injuries that might occur during the encounter. As the day of the demonstration approached, the atmosphere at Fort Bragg became electric with anticipation. Soldiers adjusted their schedules to ensure they could witness what many were calling the most interesting training event in recent base history. The outcome would be discussed and analyzed for years to come, potentially influencing policies and attitudes throughout the military community. The main training facility at Fort Bragg had been transformed into an arena that could accommodate nearly 1,000 spectators. Bleachers normally used for base ceremonies had been arranged around a central mat area where the demonstration would take place. The atmosphere buzzed with an energy typically reserved for championship sporting events, as soldiers from every unit on base gathered to witness what many considered a defining moment for military culture. Sarah arrived at the facility 90 minutes before the scheduled start time, hoping to find some quiet space for final preparation. Instead, she discovered that the bleachers were already half full with early arrivals who wanted the best viewing positions. The sight of so many spectators hit her like a physical blow, making the magnitude of what she was about to attempt suddenly and overwhelmingly real. Tank entered through the opposite entrance with his characteristic calm confidence. He moved through the crowd with the easy grace of someone accustomed to being the center of attention in high-pressure situations. Several senior officers approached him for brief conversations, their body language suggesting a mixture of respect and curiosity about the upcoming demonstration. The official rules had been established through careful negotiation between representatives of both participants. The demonstration would consist of 3 phases designed to test different aspects of military capability. The first phase would involve hand-to-hand combat with protective gear, scored by qualified judges. The second phase would test tactical problem-solving under physical stress, and the third would be a comprehensive scenario combining multiple skills. General Rodriguez took her position at the head table alongside other senior officers who would serve as official observers. She had insisted on maintaining strict oversight to ensure that the demonstration remained professional and that neither participant would suffer long-term consequences from what was essentially an elaborate training exercise. Sarah began her warm-up routine in a designated area adjacent to the main mat, trying to block out the sounds of the growing crowd and focus on the techniques she had practiced countless times. Her movements were precise and economical, reflecting the efficiency that had become her trademark throughout training. Several junior officers watched her preparation with obvious interest, many seeing her in action for the first time. Tank's warm-up was equally professional, but demonstrated the fluid power that came from years of elite-level training. His movements showed the kind of controlled violence that special operations personnel developed through constant exposure to combat scenarios. The contrast between his approach and Sarah's was immediately apparent to everyone watching the preparations. The first phase began with formal introductions and a review of safety procedures. Both participants wore protective gear designed to prevent serious injury, while allowing for realistic combat techniques. The judges were experienced combat instructors familiar with evaluating performance under pressure. Their positioning around the mat ensured comprehensive coverage of the action from multiple angles. Tank's initial approach was cautious and analytical, treating Sarah as he would any unknown opponent until he could assess her actual capabilities. He had watched enough video footage to understand her technical proficiency, but experiencing her skills firsthand would provide information that no amount of preparation could supply. His first few moves were designed to test her reflexes and defensive positioning. Sarah responded to Tank's initial probes with the patience and precision that had become her signature. She avoided direct engagement while gathering information about his preferred techniques and timing. Her strategy was based on the understanding that she couldn't match his strength, so she needed to create situations where strength became less important than timing and leverage. The crowd's energy shifted noticeably as the first phase progressed. Many spectators had expected Tank to dominate immediately through his obvious physical advantages, but Sarah's defensive skills were proving more sophisticated than anticipated. She absorbed his initial attacks without taking significant damage while demonstrating footwork and positioning that impressed even skeptical observers. Tank began to increase the intensity of his attacks as he realized that Sarah's defensive capabilities were requiring him to work harder than he had expected. His years of experience told him that patience was often the key to victory against technically skilled opponents. But the public nature of the demonstration added pressure to produce decisive results quickly. Turning point came midway through the first phase when Tank committed to a powerful takedown attempt that would have been devastating against most opponents. Sarah recognized the attack pattern from her countless hours of study and executed a counter that she had practiced specifically for this situation. Using Tank's momentum against him, she managed to reverse the position and briefly gain a dominant position. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Cheers erupted from sections where soldiers had been supporting Sarah, while other areas fell silent as spectators processed what they had just witnessed. Tank recovered quickly from the reversal, but the psychological impact was already spreading through the facility. The demonstration had suddenly become genuinely competitive. Tank's response to being countered revealed the champion mindset that had made him legendary within the special operations community. Rather than becoming frustrated or reckless, he adapted his strategy to account for Sarah's capabilities while maintaining the controlled aggression that had served him throughout his career. The level of competition had elevated beyond what either participant had originally anticipated. Sarah felt a surge of confidence from successfully executing her planned counter, but she was experienced enough to understand that Tank would be much more dangerous now that he recognized her as a legitimate threat. The first phase was approaching its conclusion, and both participants knew that the remaining portions of the demonstration would test different aspects of their respective skill sets. The second phase of the demonstration had concluded with honors essentially even between the two competitors. Tank's experience and physical strength had been balanced by Sarah's tactical intelligence and superior preparation for the specific challenges they faced. The crowd's energy had reached fever pitch as spectators realized they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. A genuine competition between two fundamentally different approaches to military excellence. The final phase was designed as a comprehensive test combining hand-to-hand combat with tactical problem-solving under extreme physical stress. Both participants would be required to navigate a complex obstacle course while engaging in combat scenarios and solving time-sensitive challenges. The phase was intended to simulate the chaos and multi-dimensional demands of real military operations. Sarah knew that this final phase represented her best opportunity to prove her point about the importance of adaptability over raw strength. The complex nature of the challenges would require constant decision-making under pressure, an area where her training and natural intelligence could potentially overcome Tank's physical advantages. She had studied the course layout extensively and developed strategies for each section. Tank approached the final phase with the measured confidence of someone who had faced life-or-death situations countless times. While he respected Sarah's performance in the earlier phases, he remained convinced that the cumulative physical demands of the comprehensive test would ultimately favor his superior strength and endurance. His strategy was to maintain steady pressure throughout the course, wearing down her defenses gradually. The course began with a series of obstacles that required both participants to navigate while carrying military equipment and facing periodic combat challenges from role-playing opponents. Sarah's smaller size actually proved advantageous in several sections, allowing her to move through confined spaces more quickly, while Tank's larger frame made certain obstacles more difficult to navigate efficiently. The first real test came at a section designed to simulate urban combat, where both participants had to clear a multi-story building while facing armed opponents and securing specific objectives. Sarah's approach was methodical and precise, using stealth and tactical positioning to neutralize threats efficiently. Tank relied more heavily on his physical presence and direct engagement, clearing rooms through controlled aggression and superior firepower. As the course progressed, the physical demands began to accumulate for both participants. Tank's superior conditioning and strength reserves gave him advantages in sections requiring brute force, but Sarah's efficiency of movement and tactical decision-making allowed her to conserve energy for critical moments. The crowd watched in fascination as two completely different approaches to the same challenges produced remarkably similar results. The climactic moment arrived at the final obstacle, a hand-to-hand combat scenario that would determine the overall outcome of the demonstration. Both participants were exhausted from the previous challenges, But the adrenaline of competition and the energy of the crowd provided reserves that neither had expected to access. The combat would continue until one participant achieved a decisive advantage or the judges determined a clear winner. Tank entered the final combat with the confidence that his physical advantages would prove decisive when both competitors were operating at their limits. His strategy was to use his reach and strength to overwhelm Sarah's defenses, believing that her technical skills would deteriorate faster than his fundamental physical capabilities under extreme fatigue. Sarah understood that this moment represented everything she had been working toward. Since her decision to join the military, she thought briefly of Miguel, of Rosa, of her mother working double shifts to support the family, and of everyone who had told her that someone her size couldn't succeed in this environment. All of that doubt and determination crystallized into absolute focus on the opponent in front of her. The final engagement began with both participants circling each other carefully, each looking for openings while managing their remaining energy reserves. Tank's initial attacks were powerful but slightly slower than they had been in the first phase, while Sarah's movements remained crisp and precise. Despite the accumulated fatigue from the course, the decisive moment came when Tank committed to a finishing combination that should have ended the contest decisively. He had identified what appeared to be a perfect opening and attacked with the full force of his training and experience. But Sarah had been waiting for exactly this moment, recognizing the attack pattern from her exhaustive study of his fighting style. Using a technique that combined elements from Frank's Detroit gym training with advanced military combat methods, Sarah slipped Tank's primary attack and found herself in position for a counter that she had visualized countless times during her preparation. The move required perfect timing and complete commitment, as failure would leave her completely vulnerable to Tank's follow-up attacks. The sound of Tank's ribs cracking was audible throughout the suddenly silent facility. Sarah's perfectly executed technique had found the one vulnerable angle that could overcome his size and strength advantages, demonstrating that military effectiveness couldn't be measured solely through traditional physical metrics. Tank went down hard, the wind knocked out of him and his left side on fire with pain. The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers, gasps, and stunned silence as medical personnel rushed onto the mat to attend to Tank's injuries. Sarah stood frozen for several seconds, hardly believing what had just happened before kneeling beside her fallen opponent to check on his condition. Her first words were an apology, showing the respect and professionalism that had characterized her approach throughout the demonstration. Tank's injuries were serious, but not life-threatening, requiring immediate medical attention and several weeks of recovery time. As he was helped from the mat, he managed to catch Sarah's eye and give her a nod of acknowledgement that spoke volumes about his character and professionalism. The demonstration had ended in a way that none of the original participants had anticipated. The aftermath of the demonstration would resonate throughout the military community for years to come, sparking debates about recruitment standards, training methods, and the evolving nature of modern warfare. Sarah's victory had proven that military excellence could take many forms, opening doors for soldiers who might have been overlooked under traditional evaluation criteria. For Sarah personally, the moment represented the culmination of a journey that had begun in the streets of Detroit and led to one of the most watched training events in recent military history. She had proven that determination and intelligence could overcome seemingly impossible odds, setting an example that would inspire countless others to pursue their own unlikely dreams of military service.